Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus. It's a rare visit, but an important one that will be closely watched around the globe and comes as yet another sign of deepening ties, much to the chagrin of many countries, especially the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin is on his way to the North Korean capital Pyongyang, where he will meet Kim Jong-un. Significantly, this is Putin's first visit to Pyongyang in 24 years. So why is this visit crucial? For multiple reasons. The US and South Korea have accused North Korea of supplying Russia with artillery and other equipment for the ongoing Ukraine war, likely in exchange for food, money and military aid. Both countries deny the existence of an arms deal. But when the leaders met last year in September, they vowed to strengthen military ties. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin has become a pariah to the West. His country faces a rash of sanctions meant to cripple its war economy, and he has been seeking allies elsewhere. Just last month, Putin visited China, where he and Xi Jinping made a sweeping affirmation of their shared opposition to what they see as a US-led world order. Like many other things, Putin's visit to the north is shrouded in secrecy. But Pyongyang is all decked out to welcome the Russian president, with the city's streets lined up with Russian flags and portraits of the leader. The friendship between North Korea and Russia is eternal, reads one banner outside the Pyongyang International Airport. In a column, a North Korean state newspaper wrote Dong Sinmin. Putin extolled Moscow's friendship with Pyongyang, saying, "I'm convinced that our joint efforts will take our bilateral interaction to a higher level." Tomorrow, the 19th of June, will be the key day of Putin's state visit. There will be an official ceremony where Putin will receive a guard of honor. The major talks will commence thereafter. As part of the two-day visit, Putin will be treated to a gala concert. He's also scheduled to visit the only Orthodox church in North Korea, the Church of the Life-Giving Trinity, on his way back to the airport. Putin will travel straight to Vietnam next for another two-day trip in a display of the communist-governed country's ties with Russia, which is likely to rankle the United States. So what is Putin hoping to achieve from this visit? Experts say he began this relationship based on his need for artillery, ammunition, rockets and ballistic missiles for his invasion of Ukraine. And he will need continued supplies in the weeks and months ahead. Beyond defense, strengthening relations with North Korea is also important as Putin tries to offset international sanctions. John Nisson Wright, head of the Japan and Korea's program at Cambridge University Center for Geopolitics, says strengthening ties with its old Cold War partner allows Russia to undermine the international sanctions regime, counter any suggestion that the US and its allies have been able to isolate Moscow, and also add to concerns in Washington that it may have to deal with a materially strengthened North Korea. As we mentioned, Putin is visiting North Korea for the first time in 24 years. When he last visited the country in 2000, Putin had just become president of Russia. He was met with an elaborate welcome, including a 21-gun salute. The then North Korean leader Kim Jong II, father of the current leader Kim Jong-un, had welcomed Putin personally at the airport. Putin back then was on a mission to restore Moscow's relationship with the North. Once he came to power, Putin actively sought to rebuild ties with Pyongyang in what analysts say was a sign of Putin looking to expand Russia's regional influence. Now, why will the West watch this visit with great interest and concern? This is a rare overseas trip for Putin since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. It's also a key moment for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who has not hosted another world leader in Pyongyang, a politically isolated capital, since the COVID pandemic. The visit is expected to further cement a burgeoning partnership between the two powers that is founded on their shared animosity towards the West and driven by Putin's need for support in his ongoing war on Ukraine. The two leaders plan to sign a new strategic partnership, which will replace documents that were signed between Moscow and Pyongyang in 1961, 2000 and 2001. U.S. National Security spokesperson John Kirby told reporters on Monday that the Biden administration wasn't concerned about the trip itself, but added, "What we are concerned about is the deepening relationship between these two countries." As we mentioned, the US, South Korea and other countries have accused North Korea of providing substantial military aid to Russia's war effort in recent months, while observers have raised concerns that Moscow may be violating international sanctions to aid Pyongyang's development of its nascent military satellite program. Both countries have denied North Korean arm exports. Putin's trip reciprocates the one Kim Jong-un made last September, when he travelled in his armoured train to Russia's Far Eastern region for a visit that included stops at a factory that produces fighter jets and a rocket launch facility. This visit comes as tensions remain high on the Korean peninsula. Last week, Kim hailed the future of the country's meaningful ties and close comradeship in a message to Putin, commemorating Russia's National Day. In an article for a national newspaper this week, Putin thanked Pyongyang for showing unwavering support for Russia's war in Ukraine and said the two countries were ready to confront the ambition of the collective West. He said the two were actively advancing their multifaceted partnership and would develop alternative trade and mutual settlement mechanisms not controlled by the West, jointly oppose illegitimate unilateral restrictions, and shape the architecture of equal and indivisible security in Eurasia. This meeting also comes just days after a summit of the Group of Seven or G7 nations in Italy, where Western leaders reiterated their enduring support for Ukraine and agreed to use profits from frozen Russian assets to back a $50 billion loan to the war-torn country. There was also a Kiev-backed international peace summit over the weekend in Switzerland, attended by more than 100 countries. It was meant to drum up support for Zelensky's vision for peace, which calls for a complete withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. Now, here's what is significant. Last month, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told American lawmakers that the provision of North Korean munitions and missiles, as well as Iranian drones, had allowed Russian forces to get back up on their feet. Between August last year and February this year, Pyongyang shipped about 6,700 containers to Russia, which could accommodate more than 3 million rounds of 152mm artillery shells or more than 500,000 rounds of 122mm multiple rocket launchers, according to South Korea's defense ministry. There's plenty in this visit for the North Korean leader as well. A visit from a leader of a permanent member country of the United Nations Security Council will provide a signal to Kim Jong-un's domestic audience of his global clout and a chance to push for deeply needed economic and technological support from Moscow. In March this year, Moscow vetoed a UN resolution to renew independent monitoring of North Korea's violations of Security Council sanctions. Many analysts say this is a friendship born of convenience. Russia desperately needs ammunition, North Korea needs money. North Korea may be able to supply weapons to Russia for now, but how long can they sustain supplies under strict Western sanctions? That's the question many ask. But the two countries have another area of convergence. Both are allies in the battle against what they perceive as the imperialist West, and they are keen to send signals to the United States and Europe about further cooperation. While the two leaders' bromance will be on display once again, as they look to explore the boundaries of their ties, the relationship may continue to be strictly transactional. But make no mistake, the West will be keeping a hawk's eye on this visit, as will South Korea.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has promised North Korea trade and security not controlled by the West. It came in a letter published Tuesday by North Korean state media, where Putin pledged his unwavering support of the isolated state. That was a day after the two countries announced that Putin would visit North Korea for the first time in 24 years for a two-day trip beginning Tuesday. Putin's letter said, quote, "We will develop alternative mechanisms of trade and mutual settlements that are not controlled by the West and jointly resist illegitimate unilateral restrictions. And at the same time," he added, "we will build an architecture of equal and indivisible security in Eurasia." He also thanked North Korea for supporting what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine and vowed support for Pyongyang's efforts to defend its interests, despite what he called, quote, U.S. pressure, blackmail, and military threats. There have been some signs pointing to what's on the agenda for Putin when he visits. Commercial satellite imagery taken ahead of the visit showed preparations for a possible military parade in downtown Pyongyang. Russian media said there will be one-on-one discussions between Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and Putin's foreign policy advisor said Russia and North Korea may sign a partnership agreement during the visit that would include security issues. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller repeated charges this week that North Korea had supplied weapons to Russia for use in Ukraine. Moscow and Pyongyang have denied arms transfers. After North Korea, Putin is set to spend another 2 days in Vietnam.
We'll go across to our panel of experts in just a moment, but before that, a quick break here on Global Lens.
One of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From the past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without a bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to North Korea. Well, he's expected to reach Pyongyang later tonight. Let's introduce our panel of guests. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Dr. Sanjay Kumar Pandey, Professor at the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Great to have you back on the show, sir. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, former Indian diplomat, is also with us. And completing the panel tonight is Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at the Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses. A warm welcome to all my guests. Dr. Sanjay Pandey, if I could begin with you. There is no doubt that the West will be watching this visit very closely. But what's interesting is that this is Putin's first visit to North Korea in 24 years. The timing couldn't be more crucial, coming as it does at a time when Russia finds itself almost as an international pariah in the face of Western sanctions, thanks to the ongoing war against Ukraine. And of course, when there have been repeated allegations by the West that North Korea is supplying crucial weaponry to Russia for this war. How do you see this visit?
Well, as you very rightly said, it couldn't have come at a more appropriate time from the Russian perspective. Russia, whose war in Ukraine is going well, from Russian perspective again, but nevertheless, it is facing, for the last more than 1 year, it has been facing a serious shortage of ammunitions, of artillery, and many other smaller weapons and weapon parts. North Korea being a close ally and another pariah state in the international system, it suits well for Russia to cultivate North Korea. Of course, the relationship goes back many decades since the end of the Second World War. But then you are also right in saying that in the last 24 years, the year he became president, Putin visited North Korea when the current president's father was at that time the leader. But since then, there have not been presidential visits from Russia, but nevertheless, only last year, in September, Kim visited Russia, had a meeting with Putin. Some very important agreements were signed. So Putin is seeking allies across the world, especially in the Afro-Asian countries. North Korea, another sanctioned country like Iran, definitely is a useful and important partner. It is a matter of concern for US and West because both Russia and North Korea have been under sanctions regime for a long, long period. While North Korea is likely to supply very important ammunition to Russia, on its part, it is believed that Russia will not be averse to helping North Korea in its satellite program and its space program. Don't forget that only last year, North Korea was able to successfully test one of its missiles and satellites, which it had not succeeded in the past few years. So some experts suspect that perhaps Russia was behind it. Similarly, North Korea is short of hard cash. It is short of food grains. In both, Russia can be of help. So high technology is what North Korea needs. Simple ammunition is what Russia needs. So it's a transactional relationship in which both the parties benefit and which helps both of them to stave off US and Western pressure.
Interesting. So there are multiple reasons why this is a significant bilateral relationship. Let me take this to Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Swasti Rao, there is no doubt that North Korea desperately needs money. Russia desperately needs ammunition. Russia is also looking to offset the international sanction regime with the support of countries like North Korea and China. And then there is this shared vision, if I may say so, amongst these countries, namely Russia, China and North Korea, of, an unfair international order that's dictated by the West. But at the end of the day, is this merely a transactional relationship?
Well, a very good evening to you, Neha. And I would perhaps assert, 2 points here. One is that, yes, you are right when you say that about the transactionalist nature, because apart from all the historical ties about what happened in the Cold War, what was, which side was what superpower, etc., if you look at what is happening today, and if you want to put it into the perspective of how the war in Ukraine has been the kind of a larger matrix where you embed these things, I think what the war in Ukraine has done is that it has set up this axis of transactionalism, where you have these countries, and particularly 4 countries, of course, the 4 most sanctioned countries today, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. I mean, China, of course, is not sanctioned, but China, of course, is in many ways leading it because it is in China's interest to sort of counter the Western-led order. So you have these sanction violators who are looking to trade with each other. There are weapons at stake. There's also military technology, and there is a lot that we don't know, because let's also remember, Neha, that we are talking about countries, say, for example, North Korea. I mean, we are talking about countries that are perhaps the most closed systems in the world. So unlike the kind of culture that we have in the rest of the world, including ours, where we sit down and discuss and, try and find out what could be the motivations, what does the government say, and a relatively transparent system. No such information is going to come out from these events. Ultimately, you would only be having officially a kind of a joint statement, which is not going to tell you much. So I think a lot then is left to basically infer from what is going on, and that is why I gave you that matrix of the war in Ukraine. So that's number one. Number two, what is it that Russia and North Korea stand to gain from each other? I think you also, in your primer when you began, you made it very, very clear that it's very clear as to what really is driving this. On the one hand, you have North Korea, a kind of a pariah state, which is also looking for adding to its international clout and diplomatic, so to say, support. And Russia happens to be one of the P5 members. Of course, China happens to be another P5 member. And from North Korea's perspective, its closest ally is China. The second closest ally is now Russia. So it definitely is a win-win situation, at least when it comes to Pyongyang. Now, when it comes to Russia, it also somewhere raises a question on the Russian military-industrial complex. In 2022 September, when for the first time these allegations had come to fore, when it came from the US, predominantly from the US, about Russia using North Korean artillery shells, etc., it was actually rubbished as a Western propaganda, saying that, oh, Russia has this massive military-industrial complex. Why would it need to sort of rely on, of all the countries, North Korea? And North Korea's 152 or 155 mm shells, or 152 mm. Basically, they're getting 152 mm shells, which is like the Soviet era shells. They are not really very precise either. They're not like the 155 mm shells, which are very precise. So then, back then, it was rubbish. But then the reports kept coming. And then finally, when you had the geolocated footage of all the missiles and that were found in Ukraine, it kind of got, I would say, confirmed from several sources that indeed there is this relationship, even though we cannot really prove it on paper, but then it exists. And then it's kind of, you had these thousands and thousands of containers which were reaching Russia from the ports, of North Korea. So you have the situation. I think this will go on. It also raises a kind of a realistic question on the capacity that Russia has in terms of its military-industrial complex. Secondly, it somewhere also shows that Western sanctions do not work the way they are intended, because you have this axis of transactionalist countries that are very much sanctioned and are still going ahead. I mean, this is just one part. Look at what is happening with Iran. Iran has been very successfully sending the Shahid drones in lieu of, you don't know, I mean, it could be the currency out there exchanged could be yuan, or it could also be gold bullion. Of course, there are reports all over the place. But what I'm trying to say is that it shows, on the one hand, if it shows the limits to Russian military-industrial complex and the war of attrition that Ukraine has become, number one. On the other hand, it also shows the very significant limits on what Western sanctions can achieve. So all said and done, I think that also explains why we are so careful about what is going on. And lastly, my last point would be from India's perspective. See, from India's perspective, our approach to that region has been, again, that of, having a kind of a balanced vision and a balanced outreach. And we honestly are more concerned about what North Korea could be doing with Pakistan at the behest of China, for example. So I think that explains India's interest in the region predominantly. I mean, we are not, of course, there for any other strategic, so to say, a boycott of sanctions or supporting sanctions or so on and so forth. But I think that is how I would be looking at. Back to the West, I think this is, of course, looked upon with a lot of interest. And I would see what the joint communication or whatever, if there is any, what it says. I do not expect that the countries, the two sides would accept that they are into this weapon trade. But of course, we would see whether quid pro quo goes. And I honestly feel that this particular visit does mean that North Korea is going to become more important for Russia's war in Ukraine, which is going to go on for at least 2 more years, in my assessment. Back to you, Neha.
Very interesting analysis indeed. Of course, the growing significance of the relationship is quite evident from the fact that Kim traveled to Russia last September, and of course now you have President Putin visiting Pyongyang after 24 years. You also make interesting points about whether sanctions really work, because it's been over 2 years. The sanctions imposed by the West, led by the United States, were meant to cripple Russia's war economy. Has it really translated into the outcome that the West was hoping for? There might be a question mark over that. Let me now go across to Ambassador Yogesh Gupta. Ambassador Gupta, interestingly, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told American lawmakers just last month that the provision of North Korean munitions and missiles, as well as Iranian drones, had allowed Russian forces to get back up on their feet. And fact of the matter is that in recent weeks, it is Ukraine that has suffered a series of reverses on the battlefield, while Russia shows no signs of slowing down, even more than 24 months into the war. The question is, how significant do you believe this particular visit is? Is it just about, an exchange of weaponry and cash? Is it strictly transactional in nature? Or do you see a larger Russia, North Korea, China, Iran axis emerging against what they look at as the imperialist West?
Well, Neha, I would say more the last point that you said, that it is some kind of a axis that is emerging among these countries, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and a few others. And I think the most important part of this visit is the strategic messaging, which is being employed by Russia to convey to the West, particularly in two aspects. One is that the West tried to, convey to Putin that, look, we are there to support Ukraine on a long-term basis in its war against Russia. So Putin is now trying to say that, look, if you want to escalate this war, continue this war for a long time, Russia is also ready. Russia is taking the help of its allies like North Korea, Iran, China, and it's trying to strengthen its military supplies, whatever it needs in terms of weapons and ammunitions and so on. The other thing is of irritation, that Russia is saying that, look, if you are trying to isolate us by holding this conference in Switzerland, that's not going to work. And I can also isolate, I can also irritate the US, I can also irritate your Asian allies like Japan and South Korea. If Russia, provides the technology, for instance, to manufacture the missiles and to manufacture the vehicles for launching these nuclear weapons to North Korea, that's going to substantially change the strategic scenario in that part of the world. So Russia is saying that, look, you can't sort of beat us there, and if you have this capability to, pose this threat to us, we can also return the same coin. So strategic messaging, I would say, is the most important part, besides, of course, the ability to carry on the war in Ukraine, as my two previous co-panelists have mentioned. Then also it's a signaling to China and others that, look, Russia has many allies. Besides China, Russia has Iran, Russia has North Korea, Vietnam, and so on. So Russia is not isolated. Russia has multiple friends. Yes. And therefore, Russia can pay back.
Absolutely. So strategic messaging is as much a part of this visit as some of the transactions that might take place as a result of it. The most important message that Putin is perhaps trying to send out to the West and the world is at large is that Russia is not friendless. It has found new allies following the West treating it as a pariah and imposing all those sanctions on it. Let's not forget, just last month, Putin undertook a state visit to China. We'll discuss that and other dimensions of these new alliances that have emerged in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war on the other side of this quick break.
When we talk about India, unfortunately, the country has the highest burden of road crash fatalities.
तो लगभग 76% लोग pedestrians और two-wheeler वाले हैं जिनकी death हुई है.
While the highways are getting better in India, the local roads, the city roads, the town roads, these need to be improved.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
One of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From the past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let me go back to Dr. Sanjay Pandey at this point. Dr. Pandey, interestingly, Putin's visit to Pyongyang comes just days after the G7 leaders met in Italy, and they reiterated their support for Ukraine and agreed to use profits from frozen Russian assets to back a $50 billion deal to the war-torn country. Now, Putin has described it as theft. Soon after, over the weekend, there was a Kiev-backed International Peace Summit in Switzerland that was attended by more than 100 countries and organizations. And again, it was meant to drum up support for Zelensky's vision for peace and an end to the war. And these are obviously terms that are unacceptable to Putin. Do you believe that this visit by Putin is not just about him seeking weapon supplies from Pyongyang, but also sending out a message that I'm not as isolated as you might think. I have friends.
Absolutely. China, Putin visited some time back. Today he's visiting North Korea. After this, he's supposed to visit Vietnam.
Vietnam, yes.
So he is definitely trying to send a message that there are countries who are willing to do business with Russia and who are either supporting Russia on the Ukraine war issue, or else are at least not siding with West. So this is definitely about messaging. But what is more interesting, something which you mentioned, is about a trilateral Russia, China, North Korea alliance, if at all. Well, although both China and Russia see North Korea as useful in their dealings with the West, especially in case of Russia, or in case of China in dealing with Japan and South Korea. So North Korea remains a linchpin for them in dealing with their neighborhood security situation. But nevertheless, one should not forget that while for Russia, it is Europe, it is US, it is Euro-Atlantic alliance that is the main challenge. For China, it is mainly the prospective, I mean, US is already aligned to South Korea and Japan, but if that trilateral takes shape, then it will be a big problem for China. So all this geopolitics has many nuances and complexities. While there are convergences between Russia, China, and North Korea, at the same time, there are divergences also. China is not, I'm afraid, willing to go whole hog in supporting North Korea. It doesn't want to destabilize the situation in Northeast Asia. It doesn't want Japan and South Korea to get into a tighter US embrace and maybe join AUKUS. So it's a very complex security situation emerging vis-a-vis Ukraine and vis-a-vis North Korea and Taiwan. Taiwan adds another angle. So China is keeping these options and scenarios in mind when it is dealing with Russia and North Korea.
Absolutely. These are very complex geopolitical issues, and it's not just the United States. As I said, South Korea too will be watching this visit rather closely. Let me take this to Dr. Swasti Rao now. Dr. Rao, as has been mentioned, Putin is visiting North Korea. He'll follow it up with a 2-day visit to Vietnam, another issue that could irk the United States. And let's for a moment talk about his visit to China last month. When Putin and Xi Jinping met in Beijing, they slammed what they called, and I'm quoting the two leaders, a lingering Cold War mentality, unilateral hegemony, camp confrontations and power politics that threaten world peace and the security of every country. The message that China and Russia together sought to send out was that they're almost looking to reshape the world order, which they believe is unfairly dominated by the United States. And there comes in this Russia, North Korea, China axis that you referred to. How important do you think is this messaging that these countries are attempting?
Well, Neha, very quickly, on the one hand, I think all the panelists here agree that this has a lot to do with messaging. Now, you want to sort of unpack this messaging bit a little bit and understand where is it taking more tangible shape, right? So, in my opinion, if I were to sort of say, okay, where is this messaging taking a more tangible shape? One would be that, yes, I mean, ever since, apart from Iran, by the way, Putin also went to Iran after the war in Ukraine started, I think sometime in July or August. He paid a visit to Tehran. And back then, if you remember, there were again these reports of Iran supplying Shahid drones, which were rubbished back then, that, oh, but Russia doesn't really require any drones. And then now you know that Iran's Shahid drones actually became one of the most important, I would say, takeaways of the drone warfare as it evolved in the war in Ukraine. So anyway, number one. Number two, I think when it comes to North Korea and especially China, I think Putin especially Xi Jinping is the leader that he has met the most. You also have to sort of understand that right now Putin is also otherwise isolated, and not just from the West. See, you also have to understand the nuances, because of a lot of the global South that we keep referring to, which is again a very loosely defined term, and India, of course, is one of the members and the leaders of the global South. I think even for them, they would like to look at it with nuance. If you remember the BRICS summit that happens in South Africa, I mean, despite giving assurance that Putin won't be arrested, he actually chose not to go to South Africa. Remember, I mean, Lavrov actually went in his place.
Okay, we seem to be experiencing a technical problem with Dr. Swasti Rao's line. We will go back to her in just a moment. But in the meantime, if I could get a word in from Ambassador Yogesh Gupta. Ambassador Gupta, your thoughts on how leaders of these countries, Russia, North Korea and China, and perhaps you could add Iran to this axis, are looking to come together and send out a message, a pointed message to the West. In view of that, how do you think this visit is likely to play out?
Certainly, Neha, the visit is sending a message to the United States and its allies that, Russia is not isolated, that Russia has many friends. Russia has the ability to pursue this war in Ukraine. Russia has the ability to support the ambitions of its friends like Iran, North Korea, and China and others. And Russia can complicate the life for the United States and its allies like Japan and South Korea in Northeast Asia. So there is this whole lot of messaging which is going on. Now, Putin knows that Biden is possibly not going to come back. Biden may not be re-elected. And the next President Trump, he views and feels very differently about the Ukraine war and about this whole business of supporting even Japan and South Korea and so on. So situation can change radically in another couple of months. So for Putin, it's a question of just carrying on for a few more months and sort of ensuring that they are able to make maximal gains in the war against Ukraine. So Putin wants to be in a stronger position then to negotiate with Ukraine and its backers like the United States and so on. So, this visit is being used by Russia to send this whole lot of messaging.
A whole lot of messaging. Dr. Swasti Rao, we lost your link earlier, so I'll give you the last word. Please complete your thought.
Have to sort of unpack the messaging bit and seeing where are the tangible developments happening. On the one hand, of course, weapons continue to be a very, very important thing. The other, and two more things I'd probably say before I conclude. One is that only yesterday there was news that Russia, China and North Korea will begin negotiations to allow Chinese ships to pass through the border river of Tumen into the Sea of Japan. Okay, so you also see that this kind of a strategic messaging actually translates into tangible things about providing access to certain areas which are going to escalate tension in the region. Okay, so that's another point that we all have to look out for. And the third and the most important thing that has not really been covered so far is that while on the one hand it is Russia's maneuver or Russia's effort to show that it is not really isolated in the world, but it is also coming at a time when Russia's influence in its own neighborhood is up for a challenge because Russian peacekeepers actually withdrew from the Caucasus in Nagorno-Karabakh, and ultimately you also heard Armenia's prime minister say in no ambiguous terms that he's actually willing to leave the CSTO. So I think there is more than what meets the eye. I think from Russia's perspective, it makes all the sense to right now travel and sort of deepen the hold and the strategic alignment and the messaging on countries that feel the same about the Western-led order. So I think this comes at the right time, but we have to be a little careful about when we unpack the messaging and what all lies in its many folds. So yes, it is a far complicated thing.
I couldn't agree more with you. Often in geopolitics, there is much more than meets the eye. But one thing that we can be sure of is that when these two leaders do meet in Pyongyang, there will be plenty of bromance on display. Let's see what comes off this meeting and how the West reacts. We leave it at that. On that note, Dr. Swasti Rao, Dr. Sanjay Kumar Pandey and Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, thank you so much to all three of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to the United States and the upcoming presidential election. President Joe Biden is set to announce a new policy that would protect hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation. The action will apply to those who have been in the country for at least 10 years and will allow them to work in the United States legally. This marks the most significant relief program for undocumented migrants already in the U.S. since the Obama administration announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, in 2012. The White House says more than 500,000 spouses of U.S. citizens will benefit from this program, in addition to 50,000 young people under the age of 21 whose parent is married to an American citizen. Earlier this month, Biden had vowed to make the U.S. immigration system more fair and more just. Polls show that immigration is a primary concern for many voters ahead of the presidential election this November. The announcement comes ahead of an event marking the 12th anniversary of the DACA program, which shielded over 530,000 migrants who came to the US as children, known as dreamers, from deportation. Senior Biden administration officials say undocumented spouses of US citizens would qualify if they have lived in the country for 10 years and been married as of the 17th of June. Those who qualify will have 3 years to apply for permanent residency and will be eligible for a 3-year work permit. On an average, those eligible for the process are believed to have been in the US for 23 years now. A majority were born in Mexico. They will now be paroled in place and allowed to remain in the US while their status is changed. Numbers USA, an organization that advocates for tighter immigration controls, has slammed the new policy as unconscionable. The organization's chief executive, James Massa, said in a statement, rather than stopping the worst border crisis in history, President Biden has overreached his executive authority to use an unconstitutional process, circumventing voters and their elected representatives in Congress to send a message that amnesty is available to those who enter illegally into the United States. Those who support the move say by allowing beneficiaries to parole in place, officials will kill off the need to separate families when one spouse needs to leave the country to apply for lawful permanent residence. The application process is likely to be open by the end of summer. The White House is also planning to ease and speed up the visa process for highly skilled, undocumented immigrants who have received degrees from American universities or who have received a job offer in their respective field. Biden's announcement comes 2 weeks after he issued a sweeping executive order that allows U.S. officials to quickly remove migrants entering the U.S. illegally without processing their asylum requests. The White House says that will now happen once a daily threshold is met and the border is overwhelmed. Remember, Trump has relentlessly attacked Biden over the issue of immigration and vowed to turn it into a major election issue. And staying with the US elections, we have an interesting update for you. President Joe Biden and his Republican opponent Donald Trump are gearing up for their first debate scheduled to be held on the 27th of June ahead of the US presidential election on the 5th of November. With less than 2 weeks to go, CNN, which will host the debate, has announced the rules agreed on by both leaders' campaigns. These include microphone muting, a coin flip, and more when the two candidates face off at the network's Atlanta studio. Here's what you can expect.
Joe Biden and Donald Trump are set to meet for a televised debate on June 27th unlike any other. One accuses his rival of being unhinged and a danger to democracy.
It's clear that when he lost in 2020, something literally snapped in this guy.
While the other accuses his opponent of being senile and corrupt.
He can't talk, he can't walk, can't find his way off a stage.
With months to go until the November 5th presidential election, many voters are still undecided. That raises the stakes for the debate, which many may view for possible moments of drama, rather than for policy discussions between the Democratic president and his Republican challenger. Here's what to look out for in the first presidential debate. Biden and Trump, at 81 and 78 respectively, are the oldest candidates to ever run for president. Both are known for their tempers and impatience. They're used to commanding the stage and have both been president, which means they'll likely see little reason to yield to the other.
Go left. Will you shut up, man? Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
Biden rattled Trump during their first debate in the 2020 race, leading Trump into what was viewed as a poor performance.
I think that the country would be better served if we allowed both people to speak with fewer interruptions. I'm appealing to you, sir, to do that.
Well, and him too.
Well, frankly, you've been doing more interrupting than he has.
That's all right, but he does plenty.
Well, less than, sir, less than
plenty.
No, less than you have. Let's please continue on.
This time, Trump may try to get under Biden's skin by mentioning the recent conviction of the president's son, Hunter, on lying about his drug use to illegally buy a gun.
Really?
And I resent.
Are you talking about Hunter? Are you talking about Hunter?
I'm talking about my son, Beau Biden. You're talking about.
I don't know Beau. I know Hunter.
Yeah,
Hunter got thrown.
But Trump has to make sure not to come across like a bully to moderate voters. For Biden, it may be tempting for him to play up Trump's recent conviction for involvement in a hush money scheme, but one expert said that could allow Trump to paint himself as a victim of political persecution.
I just went through a rigged trial in New York.
For Trump, the danger lies in saying things that underscore Biden's argument that he's a threat to democratic norms. For example, he suggested he'll use the Justice Department to target his political enemies.
When he says he wants to be a dictator, I believe him.
Democrats point to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election and his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Political experts say both candidates should focus on issues that hit home with voters, like the high cost of living. Both Biden and Trump could be rusty. Trump refused to participate in the 2024 Republican primary debates, a decision that did him no harm, as he easily beat all his rivals for the party's nomination. Biden also has not been on a debate stage in almost 4 years. The debate takes place in Atlanta, Georgia, on June 27th, hosted by CNN.
Well, this is a debate to certainly watch out for. Let's get you some more news from the United States, and this story has an India connection. A group of US lawmakers are in India today to meet Tibetan spiritual leader the Dalai Lama, with the head of the delegation saying President Joe Biden would soon sign a bill that aims to press China to resolve the Tibet dispute. The bill seeks to push Beijing to hold talks with Tibetan leaders to secure a negotiated agreement on Tibet and spur China to address Tibetan people's aspirations on their historical, cultural, religious and linguistic identity. The visit is likely to rile up Beijing at a time when the US and China have sought to stabilize their rocky ties. The bipartisan delegation of 7 lawmakers, headed by Republican Representative Michael McCaul and including Democratic former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, arrived in Dharamsala earlier today. Well, the Hills city is home to the 88-year-old Tibetan monk in exile. They met with members of the Tibetan parliament in exile. US lawmakers have regularly visited Dharamsala and touted the work of the Dalai Lama to draw global support for the Tibetan people's linguistic and cultural autonomy. Beijing, which considers the Nobel Peace Laureate a dangerous splittist or separatist, has said it is seriously concerned about the visit and the bill that is expected to be signed by Biden. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said, "We urge the US to fully recognize the anti-China and separatist nature of the Dalai clique, abide by its commitments on Tibet-related issues, refrain from any form of contact with it, and stop sending erroneous messages." Lin added that Tibet's affairs are purely internal affairs of China, which brooks no interference from external forces. He said, "We urge the US to honor its commitment of recognizing Tibet as part of China and not supporting Tibetan independence, and not to sign the above-mentioned bill. Beijing would take resolute and forceful measures to safeguard its sovereignty, security and development interests," he added. The Dalai Lama fled to India in 1959 after a failed uprising against Chinese rule in Tibet. Chinese officials chafe at any interaction he has with officials of other countries. Also interestingly, in 2022, China was greatly irked with the US over the visit of the then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Beijing claims that the self-governed island is part of mainland China.
We're all very excited as part of a congressional delegation led by Representative Meeks, who is the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Chairman McCaul, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Our purpose of our visit is to reinforce the resolution that we signed and to visit His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
All right, and our last story on the show tonight is actually happy news for many in Southeast Asia. Here's why. Thailand is set to become the first nation in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage after the kingdom's Senate approved a marriage equality bill today, with supporters calling it a monumental step forward for the LGBTQ rights. The Senate voted overwhelmingly in favor of passing the bill following a final reading, with 130 senators voting in favor. Only 4 members opposed the bill. The bill still requires endorsement from the king before marriage equality can become a reality in Thailand, but the process is considered a formality. The law will then come into effect 120 days after it is published in the Royal Gazette. The result of the vote means that Thailand will become only the 3rd place in Asia to allow marriage equality after Taiwan legalized same-sex marriage in 2019, and Nepal in 2023. The bill grants LGBTQ couples the same legal rights and recognition as heterosexual couples, including rights related to inheritance, adoption and health care decision-making. Beyond the legal implications, the passage of the bill would send a powerful message of acceptance and inclusion, say activists. The marriage equality bill was supported by all the major parties in Thailand and marks a significant step in cementing the country's reputation as one of the friendliest in the region towards gay, lesbian and transgender people.
As an 18-year-old non-binary youth, it is an important step for society and for our future children. We are very proud to make history today where love triumphed over prejudice.
Faces a lot of challenges, included some kind of hate crime, as the law do not protect our family. But then look at now, we have support from the parliament, from the Senate that passed this law. That means we are now protected by law.
All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
There are beautiful golf courses, there are well-played golf courses, there are great greens. But I think we are a combination of everything.
Now, because of the nature-friendly atmosphere here, plenty of water, you can hear the